Well, it's a nice kind of like mildly foggy slash rainy day in New York, and I think that's a good time to talk about God. But I'm not really going to talk about God here, because as soon as you mention that word, people get all freaked out, right? Like, oh, don't talk like that, or God, you religious? Oh my God, like now I can't talk to you, whatever. Anyway, or worse, if you're not religious, I definitely can't talk to you, or I can talk to you, or this is the way you are, or this is the way you aren't. And listen, I've had my judgments along those same lines for sure. I did grow up with religion, and I could get into what religion because I think it's really important to not label myself. And it just so happens that the certain tenets and laws of that religion I don't practice today. But I do believe my life has been founded and grounded in a lot of the principles common to that religion and also common to other religions and other spiritual movements, simply because these religions, sects, whatever you want to call them, Buddhism, Catholicism, Christianity, Episcopalianism, Lutheranism, Protestantism, Judaism, Muslim, I could go on and on and on. I'm sure I'm forgetting some. But these were all created by leaders, people, spiritual seekers, if you want to say, who were trying to find the best path to God. And most specifically, in my estimation or opinion, having done my studying and certainly not being an expert, by reading the Bible, okay? Because that was the basic text that most people seem to subscribe to, or the Quran, or whatever have you, some larger, or the Torah, religious text that seem to give people an idea of what God's law, God's will looks like. Okay, now, those things, those movements, whether you're Muslim or or Jewish or Christian or whatever, became the fabric of our society. Different here in the United States, probably, where Christianity was more predominant as opposed to like other country where maybe Judaism or the Muslim religion were more predominant. They created fabrics in our lives, and they created a lot of the laws that made our society up. And now, years later, particularly in and around, let's just say, the late 50s, early 60s, within the baby boomer generation, in my estimation, people, instead of following along with, whatever they had followed along in terms of what their parents taught them, having been brought to church or temple or synagogue or the mosque or the temple, they started to decide for themselves. And many people, in my generation particularly, rejected this idea of God. But like what I think a lot of people were doing was rejecting the idea of religion because A, they were forced to go, B, they weren't necessarily told that they can actually evaluate what was happening in that building or in that space for themselves, and instead they were told to just follow along. It created conflict, and people ended up being like really freaked out by things that were happening within those walls that they thought were bad, and the way that they wanted to live their life, right, which was free and being able to make mistakes and think for themselves and find God or find a higher power or what have you. This is why a lot of the self-help movements evolved and created an atmosphere where it was like, find your own higher power, find your own highest self, pray to whatever you want to, don't pray at all, live by a moral code, understand universal or even metaphysical law or the Big Bang or whatever. And now we're in a unique time, because yesterday I sat with a group of people and I just felt like weary at the end of it, listening to people just like beef about their resentments about God, but it wasn't even about God. It was about religion and whatever religion they had been brought up in. And I just feel like I needed to, as an adult, evaluate the religion that I was raised with and decide whether or not it was something that worked for me. And instead, I took some parts of it, which, and just completely, like, I got rid of the rest. Like, I don't subscribe to a lot of the certain tenets and laws around, per se, like sexuality and marriage and commitment that, for example, are biblical based or part of my upbringing. But I was able to evaluate for myself, and I studied spiritual law, and I studied things like Science of Mind and A Course in Miracles, and I did read the Bible, and I did read the Bhagavad Gita, the Dhammapada, et cetera, and Siddhartha, blah, 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 blah. Now, here's the thing. We're in a unique time where I feel like people need to understand spiritual law and the part of themselves that's deeply spiritual in order to get to the next level of consciousness and the next level of humanity's creation of its best and highest self. And I don't think that that can be done without investigating or exploring some sense of whatever, again, the ocean, metaphysical law, nature, God, creation, Allah, without doing that. right? So if you rejected everything that really was religion, that's still kind of like whispering in and around our society, I'm going to invite you to look again and do some studying and find out what it is you think about spiritual law and spiritual beings and spiritual evolution, not per se in terms of like religion or what's happening out there or whether or not God kills babies or causes tornadoes, but more so in relation to what's happening inside of you. There are things happening inside of you that are unexplainable. There are things happening in and around you that are coincidental and weird and they don't make sense. And for me, that's all the realm of the highest self and highest powers. And when I start to understand and examine some of those things happening that don't make sense, I become more evolved. I become more capable of being myself. I become more confident. I become more capable, and I've become more successful. So anyway, that's my invitation to you today, to look at those spiritual laws. And like I said, I've barely touched the iceberg on this topic. And there's so much more to talk about. But I'm just saying, as an open invitation, look at it again as an aldo and ask you what it means. Have a great day.